Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the simplest words. In a world where we're taught to fear strangers and trust only those we know, one unexpected encounter on a busy city street challenged everything two people thought they knew about kindness, trust, and the invisible threads that connect us all. This is the true story of Marcus Chun, a tech billionaire who built his empire from nothing, and Jasmine Williams, a brilliant young woman whose circumstances had stripped away everything except her courage to ask for help. Their meeting lasted only seconds, but its impact would reshape both their lives forever. What happens when desperation meets compassion? When someone with nothing to lose encounters someone with everything to give? This is not a fairy tale or a feel-good movie script. This is the raw, honest account of how one moment of vulnerability and one act of unexpected trust created a bond that neither time nor circumstance could break. In an age of social media connections that feel hollow and corporate charity that feels calculated, their story reminds us that sometimes the most profound human connections happen between complete strangers who dare to see past appearances, past assumptions, and past the walls we build to protect ourselves. Get ready for a journey that will challenge your beliefs about trust, family, and what it truly means to help another human being. Because sometimes, the most important question isn't whether we can afford to help someone else. It's whether we can afford not to. The morning rain had turned downtown Seattle streets into rivers of reflected neon and rushing pedestrians. Marcus Chin pulled his black wool coat tighter as he walked the 3 blocks from his penthouse apartment to the office building that housed the headquarters of his tech empire. At 38, he had built Logic from a college dorm room idea into a company worth $8 billion. His morning walks were one of the few times he could think without interruption, away from the constant buzz of meetings, phone calls, and decisions that shaped the digital lives of millions. Marcus moved through the crowd with the practiced efficiency of someone who valued every minute. His security detail maintained a discreet distance, close enough to intervene if needed but far enough away to preserve the illusion of normalcy he craved. The weight of constant protection had become as familiar as the expensive watch on his wrist, a reminder of how his life had changed since Logic went public 5 years earlier. He was checking his phone for the morning's market reports when she appeared beside him at the crosswalk. At first, Marcus barely noticed her presence among the crowd of commuters waiting for the light to change. Then, she spoke, and her words cut through the urban noise like a bell in a thunderstorm. "Excuse me, sir. Can I come home with you?" Marcus looked up from his phone, certain he had misheard. The young woman standing next to him was perhaps 22 or 23 years old, with natural hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and intelligent brown eyes that held an odd mixture of desperation and dignity. She wore a clean but obviously worn winter jacket over dark jeans and sneakers that had seen better days. Despite her circumstances, which were becoming clearer by the moment, she carried herself with a poise that spoke of careful upbringing and inner strength. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle despite his confusion. Around them, the crowd continued its morning rush, oblivious to the extraordinary moment unfolding at the corner of Pine and 4th. Jasmine Williams took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a small backpack that seemed to contain everything she owned. She had spent 3 days working up the courage for this moment, watching Marcus walk this same route every morning, studying his face, trying to read his character in the brief glimpses she caught of his interactions with others. "I asked if I could come home with you," she repeated, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was requesting. "I know how that sounds. I know what you must be thinking. But I'm not crazy, and I'm not dangerous. I'm just out of options, and you're the only person I've seen in this city who looks like they might understand what it means to help someone who really needs it." Marcus felt his security team tense behind him, their training kicking in at this unexpected approach. With a subtle gesture, he signaled them to stay back. Something about the young woman's manner, the careful way she had chosen her words, told him this was not a threat, but something else entirely. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jasmine Williams. And you're Marcus Chin, CEO of Logic. I've been watching you walk this route for 3 days, trying to figure out how to approach you. I know this is completely insane, but I also know that sometimes insane is the only option left." The light changed, and the crowd began to move around them. Marcus found himself walking slower than usual, his usual efficiency forgotten as he processed what was happening. Jasmine kept pace beside him, her presence somehow both intrusive and completely natural. "Why me?" Marcus asked. "And why this way? If you needed help, there are proper channels, organizations designed to assist people in difficult situations." Jasmine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean like the shelter system that's been full every night for the past week? Or the job placement agencies that won't even look at my resume because I don't have a permanent address? Or maybe you mean the family services department that lost my case file twice and told me to come back next month?" She paused, gathering her thoughts as they walked past the early morning coffee shops and food trucks that fed the city's workforce. "I chose you because I did my research. Not the creepy kind," she added quickly, seeing the concern that flickered across his face. "The public kind. I read about how you started Chinologic, about the scholarship program you created for kids from low-income families, about the community center you funded in the neighborhood where you grew up." Marcus was quiet, processing her words as they continued walking. His office building was still 2 blocks away, giving them time to continue this surreal conversation. Around them, the city awakened to another day of commerce and ambition, unaware that one of its most successful citizens was having his assumptions about human connection challenged by a stranger with nothing to lose. "I chose you," Jasmine continued, "because everything I could find about you suggested that you remember what it's like to need help. And I chose this way because sometimes the direct approach is the only honest approach. I could have tried to engineer some kind of meet-cute or professional networking opportunity, but that would have been manipulation. This is just honesty." They stopped at another crosswalk, and Marcus found himself really looking at Jasmine for the first time. Despite her circumstances, she maintained an air of dignity that spoke to inner strength. Her clothes were clean and well-maintained, her hair neat, her manner articulate and thoughtful. Whatever had brought her to this desperate moment, it hadn't broken her spirit. "Tell me what happened," Marcus said quietly. "Tell me how you ended up approaching strangers on the street." Jasmine's composure flickered for just a moment, revealing the exhaustion and fear she was working so hard to contain. "It's a long story. I have time," Marcus replied, surprising himself with the truth of that statement. His morning was carefully scheduled, every minute accounted for, but somehow this conversation felt more important than the quarterly review meeting that was supposed to start in 20 minutes. "I graduated summa cum laude from University of Washington 6 months ago with degrees in computer science and mathematics," Jasmine began. "I had a job lined up with a software company in Portland, a small place, but with good people and room to grow. Everything was perfect until 3 weeks before I was supposed to start." She paused as they navigated around a group of construction workers beginning their day. "My mom got sick. Really sick. Cancer, stage 4. Diagnosed way too late because she'd been putting off doctor visits to save money. I came back to Seattle to take care of her, turned down the Portland job, used my savings to help with medical bills and rent." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the echo of his own family's struggles when he was younger. "I'm sorry. She died 2 weeks ago," Jasmine continued, her voice steady but quiet. "And that's when I discovered that medical bills and funeral costs had eaten through everything. The apartment lease was in her name, and the landlord wanted me out. No job, no savings, no family left to turn to. The few friends I had from college are all starting their own careers in other cities." They had reached Marcus's office building, its glass and steel facade rising 40 stories into the Seattle sky. The morning crowd was thickening as more office workers arrived for the day. Marcus should have been upstairs already, but he found himself unwilling to end this conversation. "You could have applied for assistance, found temporary housing, looked for work," he said, not as a criticism, but as a genuine question. "I tried all of that," Jasmine replied. "But here's what people don't understand about being suddenly homeless in a city like Seattle. You need an address to get a job, but you need a job to get an address. You need a phone number and reliable internet access to apply for assistance, but you need assistance to maintain a phone and internet access. You need clean clothes and a place to shower to make a good impression in interviews, but you need money to maintain clean clothes and access to showers. She shifted her backpack to her other shoulder, the small gesture somehow conveying the weight of everything she was carrying, both physically and emotionally. I've been sleeping in the university library when I can, in the women's shelter when there's space, in all-night coffee shops when there isn't. I've been applying for every job I'm qualified for, and most that I'm not. But it's hard to project confidence and competence when you're wondering where you're going to sleep that night. Marcus looked at his watch, a gesture that had become automatic after years of scheduled efficiency. But instead of feeling the usual pressure to move toward his next appointment, he felt something else entirely. A recognition, perhaps, of the person he had been before success insulated him from the raw uncertainties that shaped most people's daily lives. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" he asked. Jasmine met his eyes directly, her expression serious and unashamed. "I'm asking you to let me sleep on your couch until I can find a job and get back on my feet. I'm asking you to take a chance on someone you don't know, based on nothing more than your judgment of my character and my promise that I won't abuse your trust." She paused, then added, "I'm asking you to remember what it was like before you had everything figured out, and to help someone who's smart enough and hardworking enough to succeed, but who just needs someone to believe in them long enough for them to believe in themselves again." The request hung in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Marcus found himself thinking about his own journey, about the people who had taken chances on him when he was nothing more than a kid with big ideas and no resources to implement them. He thought about the scholarship student who had emailed him just last month, thanking him for the opportunity that had changed her life. But this was different. This wasn't writing a check or funding a program. This was inviting a stranger into his private space, into his life, based on nothing more than a 15-minute conversation and an intuition about her character. "This is completely crazy," Marcus said finally. "I know," Jasmine replied. "But sometimes crazy is the only option left." The executive conference room on the 40th floor of the Chinologic building had hosted acquisitions worth billions, strategic planning sessions that shaped the future of digital commerce, and meetings with world leaders discussing technology's role in global development. But it had never hosted a conversation quite like the one taking place between Marcus Chun and Jasmine Williams at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning. Marcus had spent the past hour making phone calls that his assistant Rebecca would later describe as the most unusual of her 12 years working for him. He had postponed a quarterly review meeting, rescheduled a conference call with investors in Tokyo, and asked his head of security, David Martinez, to conduct what David sarcastically referred to as the most thorough background check of my career. Jasmine sat across from Marcus at the polished oak table, her small backpack at her feet, trying to process the surreal turn her morning had taken. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle sprawled out below them, the city where she had been born, grown up, gone to school, and recently lost everything that had given her life structure and meaning. "Tell me about your background," Marcus said, his tone professional but not unkind. "Not just the recent difficulties, but who you are, where you came from, what you hoped to accomplish before everything fell apart." Jasmine straightened in her chair, recognizing this as an interview of sorts, perhaps the most important one of her life. "I grew up in the Central District, raised by my mother after my father died when I was 8. Mom worked as a nurse at Harborview Medical Center, nights mostly, so I spent a lot of time alone as a kid." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "That's when I discovered computers. The library had an old PC that most of the other kids ignored, but I was fascinated by it. I taught myself basic programming languages, spent hours working through online tutorials whenever I could get internet access." Marcus nodded, recognizing something familiar in her story. His own childhood in San Francisco's Chinatown had been marked by similar solitude and self-directed learning, though his family's circumstances had been different. "In high school, I was part of the robotics team that won the state championship my senior year," Jasmine continued. "I also tutored other students in math and science to earn money for college applications and fees. My guidance counselor said I had potential, but warned me that students like me often struggle with the transition to university life." "Students like you?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew what she meant. "First-generation college students from low-income families," Jasmine replied matter-of-factly. Students whose parents never learned how to navigate academic institutions, who don't have family connections to help with internships or job opportunities, who have to work throughout college instead of focusing solely on studies or networking. She looked out the window at the city below, her expression thoughtful. But I was determined to prove that intelligence and work ethic could overcome those disadvantages. I maintained a 3.9 GPA while working 20 hours a week at the campus computer lab. I completed 2 summer internships, one with a nonprofit that teaches coding to middle school students, another with a startup that was developing educational software. Marcus found himself impressed despite his caution. The picture Jasmine was painting was of someone who had overcome significant obstacles through sheer determination and ability, exactly the kind of person he had been trying to help through his scholarship programs. Your technical skills, he asked. What programming languages, what areas of specialization? Python, Java, C++, JavaScript, and I've been teaching myself machine learning frameworks in my spare time, Jasmine replied. My senior capstone project involved developing an algorithm to optimize resource allocation in urban food distribution systems. The professor said it had real-world applications for addressing food deserts in low-income neighborhoods. David Martinez entered the conference room carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who had just completed an impossible task in record time. As Marcus's head of security, David had worked for 3 presidential campaigns and 2 Fortune 500 companies before joining Chinologic. His job was to identify threats and minimize risks, which made his current assignment particularly challenging. Background check is complete, David announced, taking a seat at the table. And, before you ask, yes, this is the most unusual request I've ever fulfilled. He glanced at Jasmine with professional interest rather than suspicion. Everything she's told you checks out. University records, academic achievements, employment history, even the timing of her mother's illness and death. He scrolled through his tablet, consulting his notes. No criminal record, no history of mental health issues, no associations with any groups or individuals that would raise security concerns. Her professors describe her as brilliant, hardworking, and reliable. Her former employers confirm her technical skills and work ethic. David paused, then added, I also spoke with the director of the women's shelter where she's been staying occasionally. They confirm her story about the housing situation and describe her as respectful, helpful to other residents, and genuinely in need of assistance. Marcus absorbed this information while studying Jasmine's face. She had remained composed throughout David's recitation of her background, neither defensive nor overly eager to please. There was something about her demeanor that suggested she was accustomed to being evaluated and judged, and had developed the confidence that comes from knowing you have nothing to hide. There's more, David continued, his tone shifting slightly. I found records of her volunteer work at a community center in her neighborhood, teaching computer skills to senior citizens and helping with tax preparation. 3 different character references described her as someone who helps others even when she's struggling herself. He closed the tablet and looked directly at Marcus. From a security standpoint, she poses minimal risk. From a human standpoint, this is someone who has consistently demonstrated good judgment and moral character throughout her life, even under extreme stress. The room fell quiet as the 3 of them processed the implications of David's findings. For Jasmine, it felt surreal to have her entire life summarized and evaluated by a stranger. For Marcus, it confirmed what his instincts had been telling him about her character while raising new questions about what he was prepared to do with that information. I have to ask the practical questions, Marcus said finally. If I agree to this arrangement, what exactly are you proposing? What would the living situation look like? What are your expectations? And what's your timeline for getting back on your feet? Jasmine had clearly thought about these details during the hour she had spent waiting in the lobby. I would sleep on the couch or in any space you designated. Maintain complete privacy regarding your personal life and business affairs, and contribute to household tasks as appropriate. I would continue applying for jobs and accept the first reasonable offer I receive. She paused, then continued. I estimate it would take 2 to 4 weeks to find employment, and another 2 weeks to save enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a modest apartment. So we're talking about 6 weeks maximum, assuming everything goes according to plan. And if everything doesn't go according to plan, David interjected, his security background making him consider worst-case scenarios. Then, we reassess, Jasmine replied simply. But I want to be clear about something. I'm not looking for a handout or a permanent solution to my problems. I'm looking for a temporary bridge that allows me to solve my problems myself. The difference between those two things is crucial. Marcus found himself thinking about his own journey from struggling college student to successful entrepreneur. He remembered the professor who had let him sleep in the computer lab after hours when he couldn't afford rent, the venture capitalist who had taken a chance on his business plan when other investors dismissed him as too young and inexperienced. Those acts of faith had changed the trajectory of his life, not because they solved all his problems, but because they provided the stability he needed to solve his problems himself. The parallel to Jasmine's situation was impossible to ignore. There are liability issues, David said, addressing Marcus but speaking loud enough for Jasmine to hear. Insurance complications, potential legal exposure, privacy concerns that go beyond personal preference. He pulled up another screen on his tablet. I've consulted with legal, and they're preparing documentation that would formalize any arrangement and provide protection for all parties involved. But they want me to emphasize that this is uncharted territory from a risk management standpoint. Marcus nodded, understanding the complications while also recognizing that David was doing his job by presenting all the potential problems. What does your instinct tell you? He asked. David looked at Jasmine for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. My instinct tells me that the biggest risk isn't that she'll cause problems, he said finally. The biggest risk is that if we don't help her, we'll regret it later. The weight of decisions settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Marcus had built his fortune on calculated risks, on his ability to evaluate opportunities and potential downsides before making commitments that affected thousands of employees and millions of customers. But this decision felt different, more personal, and yet somehow more significant than the business choices that had defined his career. I need you to understand what you're asking, Marcus said to Jasmine. Not just the practical arrangements, but the trust involved. You're asking me to open my private space to someone I met an hour ago, based on nothing more than a conversation and a background check. I understand, Jasmine replied. And I need you to understand what I'm offering in return. Not just my promise to respect your privacy and follow whatever ground rules you establish, but my commitment to prove that your instinct about my character was correct. She leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest. I know this is completely unprecedented. I know it goes against everything you've probably been taught about maintaining boundaries between your public and private life. But sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that can't be reduced to spreadsheets and risk assessments. Marcus thought about his morning routine, the carefully ordered life he had built around predictability and control. He thought about his penthouse apartment, his sanctuary from the demands and pressures of his public role. He thought about the security protocols that protected his privacy and the personal space that allowed him to decompress from the constant pressure of leadership. Then, he thought about Jasmine sleeping in libraries and shelters, brilliant and capable but trapped by circumstances beyond her control. He thought about the young man he had been 20 years ago, full of ideas and ambition but lacking the resources to transform either into success. David, Marcus said finally, what would we need to do to make this work? Not whether we should do it, but how we would do it if we decided to move forward. David consulted his tablet again, his expression shifting from skeptical to practical. Legal documentation establishing the terms of the arrangement, security modifications to accommodate another person in your living space, and protocols for maintaining privacy and confidentiality. It's manageable if we approach it professionally. He looked at both Marcus and Jasmine. I'm also going to recommend that we establish clear expectations and communication guidelines from the beginning. This only works if everyone involved is completely honest about their needs and concerns. Marcus felt the familiar sensation that always preceded his most important decisions, a combination of nervous energy and absolute clarity. It was the same feeling he had experienced before dropping out of graduate school to start Chinologic, before making the pivot that transformed his company from a small software business into a global platform. "There's one more thing I need to know," Marcus said to Jasmine. "Why are you so confident that I'll say yes?" "Because you seem remarkably calm for someone whose future is hanging on the decision of a complete stranger." Jasmine smiled for the first time since entering the conference room, an expression that transformed her face and revealed the confidence that had carried her through years of challenges and setbacks. "Because I did my homework on you," she said. Not just the public informed the ride to Marcus's penthouse apartment was the longest elevator trip of Jasmine's life. 42 floors of ascending silence, broken only by the soft hum of machinery and the occasional ping announcing another floor passed. She stood next to the man who had just agreed to fundamentally alter both their lives, trying to process the surreal turn her desperate morning gamble had taken. Marcus seemed equally lost in thought, staring at the floor indicator numbers as they climbed toward his private sanctuary. David Martinez rode with them, his tablet containing the hastily drafted agreement that would govern their unusual arrangement. The legal department had worked with unprecedented speed to create documentation that protected everyone involved while acknowledging that they were venturing into completely uncharted territory. The apartment that emerged as the elevator doors opened was not what Jasmine had expected. Instead of the cold, minimalist space she had imagined a tech billionaire might prefer, she found herself looking at a warm, lived-in environment that spoke to both Marcus's success and his humanity. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. The furniture was expensive but comfortable, arranged to encourage conversation rather than impress visitors. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with everything from technical manuals to classic literature to biographies of entrepreneurs and social leaders. A baby grand piano sat in one corner, its surface bearing the slight dust that suggested regular use rather than decoration. "This is beautiful," Jasmine said softly, her voice carrying genuine appreciation rather than the calculated flattery Marcus had grown accustomed to hearing from visitors. "Thank you," Marcus replied, seeing his space through her eyes for the first time in years. "I designed it to be a retreat from everything else in my life. Somewhere I could remember who I am when I'm not being a CEO." David conducted a brief security walkthrough, explaining the building's systems and establishing protocols that would allow Jasmine access while maintaining the privacy and safety that Marcus's position required. The conversation was practical and professional, but Jasmine could sense the underlying strangeness of the situation for everyone involved. "The guest room is here," Marcus said, leading her down a hallway she hadn't expected. "I realized while we were in the elevator that I have plenty of space. You don't need to sleep on the couch." The room was smaller than the main living areas, but still larger than any bedroom Jasmine had ever occupied. A comfortable bed sat against one wall, with a desk and chair positioned to take advantage of natural light from a large window. A private bathroom adjoined the space, complete with towels and basic toiletries that Marcus's housekeeper had apparently arranged while they were still at the office. "This is too much," Jasmine said, overwhelmed by the reality of the space and what it represented. "I expected something much more temporary and basic." "If we're doing this, we're doing it right," Marcus replied. "You need a space where you can focus on finding work and rebuilding your life. That requires privacy and comfort, not just a place to sleep." They returned to the main living area, where the afternoon Seattle light was beginning to shift toward evening. David had departed after completing his security arrangements, leaving Marcus and Jasmine alone together for the first time since their sidewalk encounter that morning. The silence that followed was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, but rather filled with the weight of two people trying to navigate a situation for which no social protocols existed. Marcus found himself in the peculiar position of hosting a house guest who was neither friend nor employee, neither family nor romantic interest, but something entirely new in his experience. "I should probably explain some things about how I live," Marcus said finally, settling into one of the armchairs that faced the windows. "My schedule, my routines, what you can expect, and what I'll need from you to make this work." Jasmine took a seat on the couch, her backpack still clutched in her hands like an anchor to everything that had brought her to this moment. "I want to hear all of that," she said. "But First, can I ask you something? Marcus nodded. Why did you say yes? And please don't tell me it's just because you're a good person or because you believe in helping people. I've met plenty of good people who want to help, but wouldn't invite a stranger to live in their home. There has to be something more specific, something that made this feel like the right choice despite all the obvious risks. The question was more direct than Marcus had expected, but also more insightful. It forced him to examine his motivations beyond the general principles of charity and social responsibility that guided his public philanthropy. When I was 22, Marcus said slowly, I was sleeping in my car and washing my hair in the bathroom of a 24-hour diner because I had spent my last money on server space for a business idea that everyone told me was impractical. He looked out at the view that had cost him millions, but had never felt more valuable than in that moment of honest reflection. A professor at Berkeley let me audit his advanced programming classes even though I wasn't enrolled and couldn't pay tuition. A venture capitalist named Sarah Chun took meetings with me when other investors wouldn't return my calls. A diner owner named Pete let me stay in his parking lot and use his Wi-Fi without ever asking for anything in return. Marcus turned back to Jasmine, his expression thoughtful. None of them solved my problems for me, but they gave me the stability I needed to solve my problems myself. When you approached me this morning, I recognized something I hadn't seen in years. Someone with the intelligence and determination to succeed, who just needed someone to believe in them long enough for them to get back on their feet. And you think I have that intelligence and determination? Jasmine asked. I know you do, Marcus replied. Everything about how you approached this situation demonstrates it. You researched me before making your request. You chose a direct approach instead of trying to manipulate circumstances. You presented your situation honestly instead of trying to make yourself seem more or less deserving than you are. He paused, then continued, but more than that, you asked for exactly what you needed, nothing more. You didn't ask me to solve your problems or provide long-term support or create opportunities that didn't already exist. You asked for temporary stability while you solved your problems yourself. That shows remarkable self-awareness and integrity. Jasmine felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. For weeks, she had been defining herself by her circumstances, by what she lacked, and what had gone wrong. Marcus's assessment reminded her of who she had been before crisis had overshadowed capability. Thank you, she said simply. Not just for saying yes, but for seeing me as someone capable of solving my own problems. It's been easy to forget that lately. They spent the next hour establishing the practical framework of their arrangement. Marcus explained his daily routine, his work schedule, and the household systems that kept his life organized. Jasmine outlined her job search strategy, her timeline for finding employment, and her approach to maintaining professional relationships while her living situation remained unconventional. The conversation was detailed and sometimes awkward, covering everything from kitchen privileges to internet access to the management of visitors and deliveries. But it was also marked by a growing mutual respect as they each demonstrated thoughtfulness and consideration for the other's needs and concerns. There's something else we should discuss, Marcus said as their practical negotiations wound down. The public relations aspects of this arrangement. My life isn't entirely private, and if anyone discovers that you're staying here, they're going to have questions and theories. Jasmine nodded, having considered this complication. I've thought about that. If anyone asks, I'm a research assistant working on a project related to your educational initiatives. It's not entirely untrue, since I could certainly contribute to that kind of work if you needed assistance. Actually, Marcus said, his tone shifting slightly. That gives me an idea. I've been looking for someone to help evaluate applications for the next round of scholarship awards. The work would be part-time and temporary, but it would provide income while you're searching for permanent employment. You're offering me a job? Jasmine asked, uncertain whether to be grateful or concerned about the implications. I'm offering you work, Marcus clarified. Project-based, with clear parameters and market rate compensation. Something that utilizes your skills while providing you with recent employment history and a reference from someone other than a college professor. The distinction was important, Jasmine realized. A job might suggest charity or artificial opportunity creation, while project work acknowledged her capabilities and provided mutual benefit. It was another example of Marcus's ability to see past circumstances to potential, to frame assistance in ways that preserved dignity while providing practical help. As evening approached, they ordered dinner from a nearby Thai restaurant, eating at Marcus's kitchen island while continuing to talk about everything from their respective backgrounds to their thoughts on technology's role in social mobility. The conversation flowed more naturally than either had expected, revealing shared interests and values that had nothing to do with their current circumstances. "Can I ask you about your family?" Jasmine said over pad thai and spring rolls. "I've read about your professional life, but you don't talk much publicly about personal relationships." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering how much to share. "My parents sacrificed enormously to give me educational opportunities they never had. My father worked construction, my mother cleaned office buildings at night. They understood that education was the path to a different kind of life, but they couldn't guide me through the process because they had never navigated it themselves." He paused, then continued, "They died in a car accident during my senior year of college. I sometimes wonder if they would be proud of what I've accomplished, or if they would be concerned that success has separated me from the values they taught me about community and mutual support." "What values were those?" Jasmine asked gently. "That you help people when you can, that everyone deserves respect regardless of their circumstances, that intelligence and character matter more than wealth or status," Marcus replied. "That the measure of a person isn't what they achieve for themselves, but what they contribute to others." Jasmine nodded, recognizing similar lessons from her own upbringing. "My mother used to say that the difference between success and significance is whether your accomplishments make it easier for other people to accomplish their own goals." "She sounds like a wise woman," Marcus said. "She was," Jasmine replied softly. "I hope I can honor that wisdom by proving worthy of the chance you're giving me." As they cleaned up from dinner, the apartment settled into the comfortable rhythms of shared domestic space. Marcus showed Jasmine how to operate the various electronic systems that controlled everything from lighting to temperature to security. She demonstrated her technical skills by troubleshooting a connectivity issue with his home network, solving in minutes a problem that had been intermittently frustrating him for weeks. "Tomorrow you can start reviewing scholarship applications," Marcus said as they concluded the evening. "I'll set up access to the secure database and provide you with evaluation criteria. The work is intellectually engaging and directly relates to your own educational background. Tomorrow I also continue applying for permanent positions," Jasmine added. "I want to be clear that while I'm grateful for the project work, my goal remains finding full-time employment that allows me to move out and rebuild my independence." "I understand," Marcus replied. "And I respect your determination to solve T3 weeks into their unusual arrangement." Marcus Chun discovered that sharing his carefully ordered life with another person was simultaneously easier and more complicated than he had anticipated. Jasmine Williams had proven to be exactly what she had promised, a respectful houseguest who contributed more than she consumed, a capable professional who approached the scholarship evaluation project with intelligence and integrity, and a determined individual who continued pursuing permanent employment with unwavering focus. Yet their cohabitation had also revealed layers of complexity that neither had fully anticipated during their initial negotiations. The morning routine that Marcus had perfected over years of living alone now required constant microadjustments as two people navigated shared spaces and schedules. Jasmine was naturally an early riser, often awake before Marcus's 5:30 a.m. alarm, using the quiet morning hours to review job applications or work on the coding projects she maintained to keep her technical skills sharp. Marcus found himself appreciating the subtle signs of her presence. The coffee already brewing when he entered the kitchen, the gentle sounds of activity that made the large apartment feel less isolated. But he also struggled with the loss of absolute privacy that had been one of his most treasured luxuries. Simple activities like taking business calls in his living room now required consideration of whether sensitive information might be overheard. His evening routine of reviewing confidential company documents while watching news had to be relocated to his private office. The spontaneous decision-making that came with living alone was replaced by courteous negotiations about everything from meal planning to temperature settings. Jasmine faced her own adjustments as she navigated life in a space that despite Marcus's welcoming attitude, remained fundamentally his domain. She had established careful boundaries around her use of common areas, limiting her presence to times when it wouldn't interfere with his work or relaxation. She contributed to household tasks without being asked, maintained absolute confidentiality about Marcus's business affairs despite overhearing phone conversations and observing meetings, and continued job searching with an intensity that sometimes bordered on obsession. The scholarship evaluation project had proven to be more emotionally demanding than either had expected. Reading hundreds of applications from students facing financial hardship and family challenges forced both Marcus and Jasmine to confront the randomness of opportunity and the persistence of systemic barriers that prevented capable people from accessing education and employment. "This one is heartbreaking," Jasmine said one evening as they reviewed application materials in Marcus's home office. Brilliant student, graduating valedictorian from a rural high school in eastern Washington, wants to study engineering, but her family can't afford to send her anywhere with a strong program. Marcus looked at the application Jasmine had flagged, recognizing in the young woman's essay the same determination and resourcefulness that had characterized his own journey from disadvantage to opportunity. "What's your recommendation?" "Full scholarship," Jasmine replied without hesitation. Her test scores are exceptional. Her extracurricular activities demonstrate leadership and community engagement, and her essay shows the kind of perspective and maturity that suggests she'll use her education to help others. They had developed an effective working rhythm over the 3 weeks, with Jasmine conducting initial reviews of applications and Marcus making final decisions about scholarship awards. Her insights had proven invaluable, particularly her ability to identify students whose circumstances might mask their potential or whose backgrounds provided perspectives that would enrich academic communities. But the project had also revealed philosophical differences about the relationship between charity and justice, about individual versus systemic approaches to addressing inequality, and about the responsibilities that came with wealth and privilege. "Sometimes I wonder if we're just putting band-aids on problems that require surgery," Jasmine said during one of their evening review sessions. "These scholarships change individual lives, but they don't address the underlying issues that make it difficult for talented students from low-income families to access higher education." Marcus looked up from the application he was reading, interested in her perspective. "What kind of surgery do you think would be more effective?" "Policy changes that make public higher education affordable for everyone," Jasmine replied. "Investment in K-12 education systems that serve disadvantaged communities. Economic policies that provide families with living wages so parents don't have to choose between sending their kids to college and paying for healthcare or housing. Those are systemic changes that require political action," Marcus observed. "In the meantime, do we help the individual students we can reach, or do we withhold assistance until larger problems are solved?" It was a conversation they returned to repeatedly, exploring the tension between immediate impact and long-term transformation, between individual charity and social justice, between working within existing systems and demanding fundamental change. Neither had easy answers, but their discussions deepened both their understanding of the issues and their respect for each other's perspectives. The job search process that had brought Jasmine to Marcus's doorstep continued with mixed results. Her technical skills and academic record generated interest from potential employers, but the gap in her employment history and her unconventional living situation created complications in the interview process. "They want to know why I'm not currently employed," Jasmine told Marcus after a particularly frustrating phone interview. "I can't explain about being homeless without raising questions about my stability, but I can't pretend I've been employed somewhere without creating problems if they check references." "What have you been telling them?" Marcus asked. "That I took time off to care for my mother during her illness and am now ready to re-enter the workforce," Jasmine replied. "It's true, but incomplete, and some interviewers seem to interpret any gap as a red flag, regardless of the circumstances." Marcus found himself frustrated by the hiring practices that penalize candidates for life experiences beyond their control. He had to resist the impulse to make phone calls on Jasmine's behalf, knowing that such intervention would undermine her goal of succeeding on her own merits. Instead, He offered practical support in the form of reference letters, interview preparation, and introductions to professionals in her field who might provide networking opportunities. The balance was delicate, providing assistance that genuinely helped while avoiding actions that might make employers question her independence or capability. The most challenging aspect of their arrangement proved to be managing the emotional complexity of two people sharing intimate daily space, while maintaining carefully defined boundaries. They had both approached their initial agreement as a practical transaction, but 3 weeks of shared meals, daily conversations, and mutual support had created a connection that defied easy categorization. Marcus found himself looking forward to their evening conversations about the scholarship applications, appreciating Jasmine's insights not just about individual candidates, but about education, technology, and social issues that affected his business decisions. Her perspective as someone who had navigated disadvantage through intelligence and determination provided him with understanding that complemented his own experience and informed his leadership choices. Jasmine discovered that Marcus's success hadn't isolated him from genuine human concerns, that his wealth hadn't eliminated his capacity for empathy or his memory of struggle. Their conversations revealed shared values around education, community development, and the responsible use of technology that went far beyond their temporary housing arrangement. But they also both recognized the potential complications of allowing their professional and practical relationship to evolve into something more personal or emotionally complex. The power imbalance inherent in their situation, the temporary nature of their arrangement, and their shared commitment to Jasmine's independence all argued for maintaining clear boundaries. "I've been thinking about something," Jasmine said one evening as they cleaned up from dinner. "About the fact that we've been living together for 3 weeks, and I know more about your business philosophy than your personal life." Marcus paused in loading the dishwasher, uncertain where the conversation was heading. "What do you mean?" "I mean that we talk about work, about scholarship applications, about social issues, and technology trends. But we almost never talk about relationships, or family, or the personal experiences that shaped who we are outside of our professional identities," Jasmine explained. "Those conversations might complicate our arrangement," Marcus replied carefully. "They might make it harder to maintain appropriate boundaries, or they might help us understand each other well enough to maintain those boundaries more effectively," Jasmine countered. "Right now, we're both being so careful to avoid crossing lines that we might be creating artificial distance that makes everything more awkward than it needs to be." Marcus considered her point as he finished with the dishes. She was right that their conversations had remained within carefully defined parameters, avoiding topics that might reveal too much about their inner lives or create emotional intimacy that could complicate their practical arrangement. "What would you like to know?" he asked finally. "Why don't you have closer personal relationships?" Jasmine replied directly. "You're intelligent, successful, thoughtful, and kind. You must have opportunities for romantic partnerships or deep friendships. But you live alone in this beautiful space with no signs that you share it with anyone on a regular basis." The question was more personal than anything she had asked during their 3 weeks together. But it was also asked with the directness and lack of judgment that had characterized all her interactions with him. "Success can be isolating," Marcus said slowly. "It becomes difficult to distinguish between people who are interested in you as a person and people who are interested in what you can provide for them. After a while, it seems easier to maintain professional relationships and avoid the complications of trying to figure out people's motivations." He paused, then continued, "I also work constantly. China logic requires enormous amounts of my time and attention, and I've convinced myself that the personal sacrifice is worth it because of the positive impact the company has on the world. But somewhere along the way, I think I forgot how to have relationships that aren't centered around work or business objectives." "Do you miss it?" Jasmine asked. "Having people in your life who know you as something other than a CEO?" "I didn't think I did," Marcus replied honestly. "But these past 3 weeks have reminded me what it's like to have daily conversations with someone who sees me as a person rather than a position. It's been surprisingly valuable." "For me too," Jasmine admitted. "I've spent so much energy recently just trying to survive that I forgot what it was like to have intellectual conversations, to work on meaningful projects, to feel like my opinions and insights were valued by someone whose judgment I respect. They stood in the kitchen, the dinner cleanup complete, both recognizing that their conversation had moved into territory they had been carefully avoiding. The acknowledgement of mutual appreciation and personal connection created a moment of intimacy that felt both natural and potentially dangerous to the balance they had established. "We're good at this," Jasmine said finally. "Living together, working together, supporting each other's goals without creating dependency or obligation. It's been easier than either of us expected." "Too easy, maybe," Marcus replied. "Easy enough that I sometimes forget this is temporary." "That's what I've been thinking about," Jasmine said. "Whether the temporary nature of this arrangement is what makes it work so well, or whether we've discovered something sustainable that we're planning to discard unnecessarily." The question hung in the air between them, unanswered, and the job offer came on a Thursday morning in the 6th week of Jasmine's stay with Marcus. She had just finished reviewing the final batch of scholarship applications when her phone rang with news that would change everything they had carefully constructed together. EDU Tech Solutions, a company that developed learning platforms for underserved school districts, was offering her a position as a senior software developer with a starting salary that would allow her to afford a decent apartment within 2 weeks of her first paycheck. The role combined her technical expertise with her passion for educational equity, exactly the kind of opportunity she had been hoping to find when she first approached Marcus on that rainy Seattle morning 6 weeks earlier. "They want me to start Monday," Jasmine told Marcus when he returned from his morning run. She was sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop open, the offer letter displayed on the screen, her expression a mixture of excitement and something more complex that Marcus couldn't immediately identify. "That's fantastic," Marcus replied, meaning it even as he felt an unexpected hollow sensation in his chest. "This is exactly what you've been working toward. The company's mission aligns perfectly with your values, and the technical challenges will utilize all your skills." "It is perfect," Jasmine agreed. "Better than anything I had hoped for when I was sleeping in libraries and applying for jobs from coffee shops. I should be celebrating." Marcus poured himself a glass of water and took a seat across from her at the island. "But you're not celebrating." "Why?" "Because this means our arrangement ends," Jasmine said simply. "And I've realized that I don't want it to end. Not the housing situation specifically, but whatever we've built together over these past 6 weeks. The honesty of her statement hung between them, acknowledging what they had both been carefully not discussing as her job search progressed toward inevitable success. Their temporary arrangement had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a partnership that worked on practical, intellectual, and personal levels in ways that went far beyond their original agreement. Marcus looked around the apartment that would soon return to its previous state of ordered solitude. The coffee maker that now automatically brewed for 2 people instead of 1. The dining table that had become a workspace for scholarship evaluations and strategic planning sessions. The living room where their evening conversations had become the most intellectually stimulating and personally meaningful part of his daily routine. "I've been thinking the same thing," Marcus admitted. "These 6 weeks have been the most fulfilling period of my life in years, not because of any specific accomplishment or business success, but because of the daily experience of sharing space and purpose with someone whose perspective challenges and complements my own." They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the implications of what they were acknowledging. Their arrangement had succeeded beyond their wildest expectations, but that very success had created a new problem: how to transition from a temporary solution back to separate lives without losing the valuable connection they had discovered. "What if we didn't have to lose it?" Jasmine asked finally. "What if there was a way to maintain what we've built while also allowing me to establish the independence that was always the goal of this arrangement?" Marcus looked at her with interest. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that we've proven we work well together, both personally and professionally," Jasmine replied. "We've established trust, respect, and communication patterns that could support a different kind of partnership." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "You need someone to help expand your educational initiatives and evaluate the social impact of Chinologic's community programs. I need opportunities to combine my technical skills with my interest in education equity. We both value the intellectual and personal connection we've developed." Are you suggesting a business partnership? Marcus asked. I'm suggesting that we consider whether there's a way to formalize our collaboration in a way that provides me with professional independence while maintaining the personal connection we've discovered, Jasmine replied. Not as employer and employee, but as partners working towards shared goals. The idea was intriguing, but also complicated by the circumstances of their meeting and the power imbalances that had shaped their initial arrangement. Marcus found himself attracted to the possibility of continuing their collaboration while also concerned about the potential complications. We would need to be very careful about the structure, Marcus said slowly. Any partnership would need to ensure your complete autonomy and provide you with equity and decision-making authority. It couldn't be a situation where your dependence on my financial resources created artificial constraints on your independence. Agreed, Jasmine replied. Which is why I think my first step needs to be taking the job with EDU Tech Solutions, establishing my professional credentials independently, and proving to both of us that any future partnership would be based on mutual professional respect rather than circumstantial dependency. Marcus nodded, recognizing the wisdom of her approach. You want to complete the journey you started when you approached me 6 weeks ago. You want to prove that you can solve your problems independently before considering new collaborative opportunities. Exactly, Jasmine confirmed. I need to know that any decisions I make about our relationship are based on genuine preference rather than financial necessity. And you need to know that any partnership we consider is based on my capabilities rather than your charitable instincts. It was a mature and thoughtful approach that reflected the growth both of them had experienced during their time together. The young woman who had desperately approached a stranger for help had evolved into someone confident enough to define the terms of her own success, while the successful entrepreneur who had lived in careful isolation had discovered the value of genuine human connection. So what does that mean for the immediate future? Marcus asked. It means I take the job, find an apartment, and establish my independence, Jasmine replied. It means we transition from housemates to friends who maintain regular contact, while I prove myself in my new role. It means we give ourselves time to discover whether what we've built together can survive in the real world outside this artificial environment. And if it can? Marcus asked. Then, we explore possibilities for formal collaboration, Jasmine said. Maybe a consulting arrangement where I help evaluate and expand your educational programs. Maybe a joint venture that combines your resources with my insights about serving underserved communities. Maybe something we haven't thought of yet. And if it can't survive outside this environment? Marcus asked. Then, we'll have given each other something valuable anyway, Jasmine replied. You'll have reminded me that there are people in the world who believe in helping others without expecting anything in return. I'll have reminded you that success doesn't require isolation, that connection and collaboration can enhance rather than threaten your achievements. Marcus felt the truth of her words settle over him like a recognition of something he had always known but had forgotten in the pursuit of professional success. The past 6 weeks had been the most personally fulfilling period of his adult life, not because of any business accomplishments but because of the daily experience of meaningful human connection. There's something else, Jasmine said, her tone shifting slightly. Something I need to tell you before I move out. And we attempt to transition to a different kind of relationship. Marcus looked at her expectantly, uncertain what additional complexity she was about to introduce. I'm falling in love with you, Jasmine said simply. Not with your wealth or your success or the security you've provided, but with your intelligence, your values, and the person you are when you're not trying to be a CEO. I wanted you to know that before I leave, so there are no misunderstandings about my motivations or my feelings. The statement was delivered with the same directness and lack of manipulation that had characterized all of Jasmine's interactions with Marcus. She wasn't asking for anything or expecting any particular response, simply sharing information that she believed was relevant to their future relationship. Marcus felt his heart rate increase as he processed her words and his own response to them. Over the past 6 weeks, he had been carefully avoiding acknowledging his growing feelings for Jasmine, convincing himself that any attraction was inappropriate given the circumstances of their arrangement and the power dynamics involved. I'm falling in love with you too, Marcus replied, surprising himself with his honesty. I've been trying not to admit it because I was concerned about the ethics of developing romantic feelings for someone who was depending on my help. But what I feel has nothing to do with our housing arrangement and everything to do with your intelligence, your character, and the way you've challenged me to become a better version of myself. They sat looking at each other across the kitchen island, both recognizing that their conversation had moved into territory that fundamentally altered everything about their relationship and their future plans. This complicates things, Jasmine said finally. It does, Marcus agreed. But it also clarifies things. If we're going to explore a romantic relationship along with a professional partnership, we need to do it from positions of equal independence and mutual respect. Which brings us back to the same plan, Jasmine said. I take the job, establish my independence, and we see whether what we feel for each other can develop naturally without the artificial constraints or supports of our current situation. With one modification, Marcus added, we're honest about our feelings from the beginning instead of pretending that our professional collaboration exists in isolation from our personal connection. They spent the rest of the morning making practical plans for Jasmine's transition to independence. Marcus would help her secure a furnished apartment close to her new job, provide references and recommendations that would ease her entry into Seattle's professional community, and maintain the regular contact that would allow their relationship to evolve naturally. The scholarship evaluation project was complete, with awards going to 47 exceptional students who would begin their college careers the following fall with full financial support. The database of applications and evaluation criteria they had developed would serve as a foundation for future scholarship programs, and Jasmine's insights would inform Marcus's approach to educational philanthropy for years to come. We did good work together, Marcus said as they reviewed their final recommendations. We did, Jasmine agreed. And not just with the scholarships, but with each other. 6 weeks ago, you were a successful but isolated entrepreneur who had forgotten the value of human connection. I was a capable but desperate young woman who had lost faith in the possibility of unexpected kindness. And now? Marcus asked. Now you remember that success is meaningless without relationships that give it context and purpose, Jasmine replied. And I remember that intelligence and determination can overcome almost any obstacle when combined with the support of people who believe in your potential. 2 weeks later, Marcus helped Jasmine move into a one-bedroom apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, close to both her new job and the community center where she planned to volunteer teaching coding classes to teenagers. The apartment was modest but comfortable, a space that reflected her personality and aspirations while demonstrating her ability to create a home for herself. As they finished arranging her furniture, both of them recognized that they had successfully completed the journey that had begun with a desperate request on a busy street corner. Jasmine had re-established her independence and professional credibility, while Marcus had rediscovered the possibility for genuine human connection that enhanced rather than threatened his success. Dinner tomorrow? Marcus asked as he prepared to leave her new apartment. I'd like that, Jasmine replied. But this time I'm cooking. I want to show you that I can provide hospitality as well as receive it. As Marcus drove back to his penthouse that evening, he reflected on the transformation that 6 weeks had brought to both their lives. The young woman who had asked to come home with him had indeed come home, but not in the way either of them had expected. She had found her way to a place of belonging that included but transcended physical space, a sense of connection and purpose that would shape all her future choices. The apartment that Marcus returned to was physically unchanged but felt completely different. The solitude that had once provided sanctuary now felt like isolation. The ordered routines that had once provided comfort now felt rigid and confining. The space remained beautiful and functional, but it no longer felt like home in the way it had during the weeks when two people had shared its rooms and its possibilities. 6 months later, Marcus and Jasmine announced the formation of the Educational Equity Initiative, a joint venture that combined Chinologic's technological resources with innovative approaches to serving underserved communities. The organization would develop software platforms for schools in low-income areas, provide technical training for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, and create pathways for talented individuals to access opportunities regardless of their economic circumstances. The press release describing their professional partnership made no mention of their personal relationship, though anyone who observed them during board meetings or public presentations could see the deep mutual respect and affection that informed their collaboration. They had discovered that business partnerships and romantic relationships could complement rather than compromise each other when built on foundations of honesty, equality, and shared values. The young woman who had approached a stranger with a desperate request for help had become a successful entrepreneur and advocate for social justice. The wealthy businessman who had lived in careful isolation had become part of a partnership that enriched both his professional accomplishments and his personal life. Together, they had created something that neither could have achieved alone, a model for how individual success and social responsibility could be integrated, how personal relationships and professional collaboration could enhance each other, and how unexpected encounters could transform lives in ways that ripple far beyond the immediate circumstances that created them. Their story became a reminder that sometimes the most important conversations happen between strangers, that sometimes the most valuable partnerships begin with acts of faith, and that sometimes the question isn't whether we can afford to help another person, but whether we can afford to miss the opportunity for connection that helping others creates. The billionaire who had been stunned by a young woman's request discovered that saying yes to unexpected vulnerability could lead to achievements that no amount of individual success could provide. The young woman who had risked everything on a stranger's kindness discovered that courage and honesty could create possibilities that exceeded her most optimistic expectations. Together, they proved that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the simplest words. "Excuse me, can I come home with you?" And sometimes, the answer that changes everything is simply, "Yes," wraps unanswerable. Both understood that their arrangement had succeeded precisely because it had clear parameters and a defined endpoint. But both also recognized that something valuable had developed between them, something that would be lost when Jasmine moved out, and they returned to their separate lives. "I got a second interview tomorrow," Jasmine said, changing the subject to safer ground. "Software development position with a company that creates educational platforms for K-12 schools. It would be perfect, combining my technical skills with my interest in education equity." "That's wonderful," Marcus replied, meaning it despite the complex emotions her job search success generated. "Tell me about the company and the position." As they moved to the living room to continue their conversation, both were acutely aware that success in Jasmine's job search would solve the immediate problem that had brought them together while creating new questions about the future of their unexpected connection. The apartment that had become their shared space would soon return to being only Marcus's sanctuary, and the daily rhythms they had developed would be replaced by whatever patterns their separate lives would resume. But, for tonight, they had scholarship applications to review, professional opportunities to discuss, and the comfortable routine of two people who had discovered they worked well together, even as they both understood that their collaboration was designed to be temporary. Situation yourself rather than become comfortable with a temporary solution. As Jasmine settled into the guest room that first night, she found herself staring out at the city lights that sparkled below. Somewhere down there was the library where she had spent sleepless nights, the shelter where she had waited in line hoping for a bed, the coffee shops where she had nursed single drinks for hours while applying for jobs on her laptop. The distance between that life and her current surroundings felt both vast and fragile, dependent on the continued goodwill of a man she had met barely 12 hours earlier. But, for the first time in weeks, she fell asleep without worrying about where she would sleep the following night, and, for the first time in months, she woke up feeling hopeful about her future. In his own bedroom down the hall, Marcus found himself reflecting on the day's events with a mixture of satisfaction and nervous anticipation. He had built his fortune by making calculated decisions based on careful analysis of available information. But today he had made a choice based primarily on intuition and human connection, and he was surprised by how right that choice felt. The morning would bring new challenges as they both navigated the practical realities of their arrangement. But tonight, two people who had been strangers at sunrise were falling asleep under the same roof. each of them changed by an encounter that had reminded them of the possibility for unexpected kindness in a world that often seemed to reward only predictable transactions. Asian, but the patterns behind your decisions. Every major choice you've made in your career has been about believing in people's potential rather than just their current circumstances. Your scholarship program, your mentorship initiatives, your hiring practices, they all reflect someone who understands that talent and character matter more than pedigree and connections. She paused, then continued, and because I've learned to read people during the past few weeks. When you're depending on the kindness of strangers, you get very good at distinguishing between people who want to help and people who just want to feel good about themselves. You're someone who actually wants to help. The truth of her observation settled over Marcus like a recognition of something he had always known about himself, but rarely articulated. His success had given him many things, but it had also created distance between him and the fundamental human connections that had shaped his character and motivated his achievements. Marcus looked out at the city where both he and Jasmine had grown up, where both had struggled and dreamed and worked toward futures that seemed alternately possible and impossible. The distance between the conference room and the street where they had met that morning felt both vast and negligible, separated by floors and windows and wealth, but connected by the shared experience of being human in a world that didn't always reward goodness or effort. "All right," Marcus said finally, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was agreeing to. "Let's try this. But we do it right, with clear expectations and honest communication from day one." Marcus looked up at his building, then back at the young woman who had just asked him to fundamentally alter both their lives with a single act of trust. Around them, the city continued its relentless pace, indifferent to the moment of decision that would determine whether one person's desperate gamble on human kindness would pay off. He thought about his security team, about the legal implications, about the practical complications of what she was asking. He thought about his ordered life, his privacy, his carefully maintained boundaries between his public philanthropy and his private world. Then, he thought about the alternative, about Jasmine disappearing back into the crowd, about her struggle continuing without intervention, about the distance between caring in theory and caring in practice. "My head of security is going to have an aneurysm," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. "But I think we need to have a longer conversation about this. Can you give me an hour to rearrange my morning?"